Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history.
So we're bringing you this episode from St. Petersburg, Russia. There was a big revolution that got rid of the emperor and his family.
And we're going to find out why.
Do you know what revolution means?
When a country goes against itself.
Usually when we say revolution, it'd be like a protest or rebellion. And so in Russia, there was a revolution to try and get rid of the emperor.
Who was the emperor?
So when the revolution happened, the emperor was Tsar Nicholas II. Tsar means emperor. And so he was the Tsar just over 100 years ago. Also going to get a mention in our story is his grandfather, Alexander II. We'll find out what happens about him later on. St. Petersburg was where the emperor or empress, like Catherine the Great, where they would live and rule the whole of the Russian Empire. So we're here in St. Petersburg with our wonderful tour guide, Kate.
So we are standing near Church of Our Savior on the spilled blood. And that's where our Emperor Alexander II died. We had a terrorist group called People's Will here in St. Petersburg. They wanted to kill the emperor.
Why?
Because they were against the monarchy. They were against aristocracy here and autocracy in St. Petersburg and in whole Russian Empire. That's why they wanted to kill him, and there were at least 7 assassination attempts, and we are standing at the place where they did it. The emperor was going to the Hermitage Museum, to the Winter Palace, and there were 2 carriages. The emperor was sitting in the second one, and the first one blew up. The bomb blew up. The emperor wanted to look his potential murderer in the eye, so he came closer, and that's when the second bomb blew up. The emperor lost both of his legs, and he was lying there, and the last word that he said was home. So he was brought home to the Winter Palace, and that's when he died the same day.
So this church is called Saviour of the Spilled Blood?
The church has many names. The Church of Our Savior on the Spilled Blood, the Church of Resurrection of Christ, the Church on the Blood, but the main name is the Church of Our Savior on the Spilled Blood.
So does the spilled blood refer to Christ and Tsar Alexander, or just one?
Alexander II.
So because his blood was spilled here, and that's why they built this church?
Of course, his heir Alexander III wanted everyone to remember what happened to his father, and that's why he ordered to erect this fantastic church.
Do you know, James, where the Tsar and his family actually lived?
In the Winter Palace.
So we visited the Winter Palace. We actually went in summer, but it was a cold, rainy, wintry day.
Dad and me are at the Winter Palace.
Yeah, here we are, the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. So you probably heard there was a Russian Revolution. Well, actually, there were 3. Yep. So the first one was more of an attempted revolution in 1905 here in St. Petersburg. Here at the Winter Palace, people were outside on the square at the front of this building protesting because they were starving, and they were asking for bread, and they were asking for things to be fairer. Of course, the Tsar, Nicholas II, his grandfather had actually been assassinated. He'd been killed by revolutionaries. And his grandfather had passed lots of changes to help the people. So Nicholas was like, well, if I help the people, I'm just going to get killed like Alexander II, my grandfather, did. Better to do things like my dad did, Alexander III. He kept a strict control over everything. Anyway, in this revolution in 1905, the Tsar's government had decided in advance, documents now tell us, the evidence tells us, to shoot protesters. They wanted to send a message to say, we'll have no protesting around here, thank you. So when the protesters were out there on the square by the Winter Palace, the guards went out and opened fire on their own people, killing hundreds. And then there was no more revolution for years.
We love history, baby. We love history.
When World War I started in 1914, at first people supported the Tsar and his government. But then the war dragged on, and as the 2-3 years went by, the people got more and more fed up with the fact they weren't winning the war. And also, as the Tsar was off at the front line trying to organise the troops, do you know who was running Russia? Who was left in control?
Alexander II.
Alexandra, his wife, the Tsar's wife, was left here in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg in control, and she took on a very risky advisor, a strange guy who said he was a holy healer, but really was a drunkard who liked to kiss lots of different women. Do you know what his name was?
Rasputin.
Yeah, Rasputin. So Rasputin was here having his influence over Alexandra, telling her what decisions to make. Nicholas was away at the front line. The rumours are that Rasputin even got kissy-kissy with Alexandra, the Tsar's wife. Anyway, with all this going on, the people knew that Rasputin was a bad guy and they didn't want him in any power and control. So that was another reason why they started planning another protest. So in 1917, I said there were 3 revolutions. One was in 1905, 2 were in 1917.
Whoa.
So the first one in 1917 was in February, and that was the one you heard about, James, where they eventually kicked the Tsar and his government out of power.
We love history, baby. We love history. When are we going to talk about Rasputin?
Do you want to know what happened to him?
Yeah.
So Rasputin, he was a bad influence on the government, and pretty much almost everyone was agreeing that, except Alexandra, the Tsar's wife. Now Rasputin, when he had first come to the Winter Palace, he had come to try and help her son, Alexei, who had a blood disease called haemophilia, and he was very weak a lot of the time. And when Rasputin was around, somehow Alexei started feeling better. And then Rasputin would go, and Alexei would feel bad again, so Rasputin would be invited back, and Alexei would feel better again. So Alexandra really thought Rasputin's got some sort of magic about him. And so she had him around the palace as her advisor, whilst her husband Nicholas, Tsar Nicholas II, was off near the front line trying to organise the army during World War I. Anyway, more and more people were seeing that Rasputin was actually a crazy drunk guy, and they didn't want him making decisions about running the country. So one of the Tsar's relatives, a guy called Prince Yusupov, invited Rasputin to a dinner party. He said there'll be lots of wine and vodka and lots of food. Oh, and did I mention there'll be lots of wine and vodka? So Rasputin loved all that. So Rasputin went along happily. And of course, once he got there, Yusupov had poisoned the wine with enough poison, we think, to kill 5 people. Then Rasputin seemed to be fine. Didn't seem to be ill at all. So in the end, Yusupov went and got a gun and shot him several times. The bullets went into Rasputin's body. He fell down on the floor. Yusupov left the room with his friends, saying to each other, "Oh, job done, finally, we've got rid of him." So they went to a different room and they had a celebratory drink. And then a little bit later, Yusupov went back into the room where Rasputin's body was lying on the floor. And he leant over the body and looked at Rasputin's face. And at that moment, reportedly, Rasputin woke up and lunged for Yusupov. Yusupov had the fright of his life. There was a struggle. Rasputin ran out of the room, ran out of the building. He was shot more times, and so he was hit 4 or 5 times. Bullets went into him, and still he kept going for a while. Then Yusupov and his friends caught up with him, and tackled him to the ground, tied him up, wrapped him up in like a big blanket, took him to the river nearby and dumped Rasputin's body in the river. But this was in winter time, so it was an icy river. When the body was found later, and they did what's called a post-mortem to see how he died, guess how Rasputin actually died? He was found with his hand sticking up in the air, even though he'd been wrapped up with his arms next to his body. One of his arms was up in the air. He clearly got out of what he was wrapped up in, and he was grabbing at the ice. The river was almost entirely iced over, and so he was trying to get out. He died not from the poison, not from the gunshots. He died either from drowning or hypothermia, which means the cold. And that was the end of Rasputin. So, the revolution was in February 1917, and that got rid of the Tsar and his family. But there was a second revolution a few months later in October 1917, because after the Tsar was forced out of power, at this point the communists did not take power. There was actually a mix of political parties, and they got together and they formed a temporary government. Eventually the communists in October 1917, they stormed this Winter Palace and they took power.
You want to know why the poison didn't kill Rasputin?
So, Rasputin was a fortune teller, and he thought that he might get murdered, and that's why he was taking a little bit of poison every single morning when he had breakfast. And when he ate a poisoned cake and drank poisoned wine in the Yusupov Palace, nothing happened to him.
Rasputin was cleverer than he looked. Do you know that he predicted that people would try to kill him? And he predicted that the Tsar would be dead within 2 years of Rasputin's own death. Knowing that people might try to kill him, before Rasputin was ever poisoned, he found a way to get his body used to poison, so that it might be able to fight off the poison even better. And of course, after Rasputin was eventually killed, within 2 years, so was the Tsar and his whole family. That's it from Russia. What do you think the best bits were, James?
Going to see England v Colombia.
That was kind of special. What else was good about Russia?
Knowing about Rasputin.
Yeah, Rasputin's an interesting character. Do you know he had eyes, which people said at the time, that his eyes were like hypnotic. They would hypnotise you and make you do whatever he wanted you to do. Anyway.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram.
And Twitter.
And Facebook.
And please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts.
And share our podcast with friends. Don't be greedy and try to keep it all to yourself.
Yes, if we can get more listeners, then we'll keep making more episodes.
Bye for now.
From Dad and Me Love History.
Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history. Wanna know why the poison didn't kill Rasputin? Dad and me are the Winter Palace.
I forgot to start that. Can you do it again, please?
После выстрела здесь будет еще раз открываться. Знамённая века пойдет.
One, 2, 3, 4. Whoa, whoa. England now in Russia. Whoa. Drinking all the potato juice. Whoa. England going all the way. Come on, England!